Welcome to the Understanding Digital Markets Conference here at the CMA. We're really pleased to have everybody here, not least to show off our brand new building, which has been a great transformation for us as an organisation, but also to welcome such a wide variety of speakers and individuals in an atmosphere where hopefully we can learn from each other and we can really engage in a great debate around what's happening in digital, how's it going to affect us going forwards, and what are the implications for the CMA as an organisation. Today we've got a wide variety of speakers, and we will have hopefully a fantastic day where we can just have an open and honest conversation about where things are going and where they might end up.
So we've been very active in a number of areas. We have looked at a number of mergers in the digital space. This is something that happens and we need to look into, and we need to decide whether it's in the interest of consumers to allow these mergers to go through. We have been working on a big market study on digital platforms, particularly platforms funded by advertising. We published an interim report before Christmas, and we're now working on the second half of the study. We're also, we issued a digital strategy in the summer, which has a number of strands to it. One of the other strands is to advise government. The UK government commissioned a report by Jason Furman and some of his colleagues last year, which has been quite influential in the debate. And we are keen to assist the government in implementing the recommendations coming out of that study. I mean, in many ways, what we're trying to do is to rebalance the assessment in this area and just make sure that while there's a lot happening here that we like in terms of investment and just dynamism, that consumers don't suffer, that consumers are also actually getting the benefits of it. It's not just the investors getting the benefits out of this activity.
This is an incredibly interesting topic that impacts everybody every day. Today is going to be one of those days where we get to share knowledge with each other, share our experiences, build up all of our understanding. So let's get on with the day.
Right. Good morning. Welcome to the event. In light of coronavirus, this conference was supposed to be live streamed and have a small live audience. We have decided, because a number of speakers and attendees have had to change their travel plans, we have decided to make the event today live stream only. We have a number of excellent speakers coming from the world of business, academia, heads of agencies, and equity analysts. It's going to be a very interesting discussion today. We would very much welcome live audience participation. We are using Slido as an app, and the code is 9550. And for people who want to be actively participating in the social media debate today, the hashtag is CMA Digital 2020. So we'll start the day with our chair, Andrew Tyrie, who is the non-executive chairman here at the CMA, is also a member of the House of Lords. Andrew spent more than 20 years in Parliament before taking up this role, and he's going to give us some personal reflections on why this agenda really matters to consumers, and also reflect on some of the discussions going on in Parliament about why digital is such a key area for consumers and for businesses in the UK. Thank you very much. Andrew.
Well, thanks, Andrea, and thank you very much, not only Andrea, but all the CMA team who've put a huge amount of effort into preparing for this conference, and a huge thanks to those who've come to the conference to participate in the panels, who, although you can't see them off camera, are all sitting to my immediate right. And very shortly we'll be getting the first panel underway. I thought it might be helpful just for a few minutes to set out this wider perspective on the subject as I see it. We're here today to talk about the changes wrought by the digital revolution and to discuss what they mean for the future of markets and for billions of people whose lives are being transformed compared to only a decade ago by them. We've got two panels, as you probably know. From the first, we'll be hearing from business leaders on how emerging technologies and concerns about data and privacy are shaping their industries. And from the second panel, we'll be hearing from competition authorities and experts on the regulatory and policy response to the rise of the tech giants. And it's more on the issues of the second panel than the first that I'm going to touch on in my remarks. In one way or another, we're all trying to respond to the same question: how to shape the future development of digital markets in a way that can harness the benefits and minimize the harms. It's one of the greatest challenges facing political economy today, and from it spring a set of very tough questions for all parties, and particularly for policymakers. And here, very briefly, I'll allude to four. First, what, if any, additional powers do competition authorities need? Second, are competition authorities using their existing powers as effectively as they can? Third, should digital platforms be regulated? And if so, how? And fourth, are the market-related problems thrown up by digital capable of being regulated in a way that can facilitate and increase competition, dynamism and innovation? Or would regulation, as it so often does, enfeeble competition, acting as a barrier to entry and facilitating regulatory capture? That's what, to a great extent, on and off, has been seen in the number of financial markets as they were regulated, often on systemic grounds as well as, that is, prudential grounds as well as conduct grounds. Of course, those four questions I've just cited aren't the only questions, but they're certainly some of the big ones, and they're all controversial. This conference is about how digital is changing business models, changing competition policy, and changing consumer outcomes. And so with that in mind, I will only add a few thoughts on the first two of the questions I've set out, and I'll allude briefly to what the CMA is doing on them, but only very briefly. I will argue that the unprecedented challenge of digital will indeed necessitate a strengthening of both competition and consumer protection powers, and I'll also argue that a lot more can already be achieved within the existing legal framework if so-called soft power can be developed by competition and consumer authorities. Now, before entering that contested territory, I just want to set out what I see as 5 major points of agreement. I think it's very important we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater on this subject. First, any response to the challenge of digital needs to have in mind the scale of the welfare gains to ordinary people that have been delivered over the past decade or so. These are huge. As both citizens and consumers, we've all enjoyed a vast increase in choice and convenience and lower prices. And particularly as citizens, we've all been empowered. We have much greater freedom of expression. New markets have both tested the traditional model of a paternalistic government and a dependent people, common in early post-war democracies, and to some degree is now challenging the existing post-collapse of communism model too. The digital revolution has also released many small firms from the confines of their local markets and enabled them to obtain access to customers around the world. And it's greatly disrupted many markets and business models, broadcast media, taxis and food delivery among them. A very diverse group of markets. Almost all of that has been for the better. We like disruptors at the CMA, and we've liked them for a long time. It seems even number 10 Downing Street has caught the bug for disruptors. That's the upside. A second point of broad agreement is about the downside. The detriment caused by digitalization is wide-ranging, it's novel, and it's, in some respects, very serious. The facilitation of electoral manipulation the amplification of fake news, the erosion of the tax base, the huge increase in the risk of fraud and identity theft, something that I took a close look at when I was in Parliament. Illegal content, thriving dark markets for drugs and weapons, cyberbullying, these are not just minor side effects. They have the potential to tear at the social fabric of our respective countries, to disrupt not merely the odd market here and there, but the whole of the post-war liberal order. None of these are market harms, although it's markets, often the market for digital advertising, which has created the scope for some of these problems to thrive. Which brings me to my third point of agreement. There are also many new market-related harms. On the competition side, we've seen over the past decade or so the rise of a small number of digital platforms, operating, some of them, as near monopolies. Global in scale, dominant in their market, these platforms can destroy a small business with the change to an algorithm, and they can reap huge and persistent excess rents, protected by data moats, network effects, and strategic acquisitions, so-called killer acquisitions. As Andrea, and I think he was alluding to this a moment ago in the clip you saw, said only yesterday, there's probably been under-enforcement of merger control in digital markets. And because of the nature of these markets, this can be particularly costly for consumers. Increasingly, competition authorities are now waking up to all this. What I've summarised there are some of the market harms that directly flow from the platforms, but they're not the only forms of market harm and digital detriment that's coming through. Individuals are also made vulnerable by the digital revolution. We've been hit by much greater complexity. We've become much more vulnerable to rip-offs. We're all vulnerable to fake news and to giving consumers false confidence. We're vulnerable to websites that allow sellers to offer event tickets that they don't even own. We're vulnerable to hotel booking sites making misleading claims as part of their pressure sales tactics. And we're vulnerable to automated renewals of insurance policies, complete with additional loyalty premiums, to which consumers are oblivious because they've been opted in to paperless communication. I can't stress how important it is for us to grasp that this affects not just those considered vulnerable on traditional criteria, but the vast majority of ordinary people. People listening right now on this feed. People can all too easily now get ripped off. People who formerly considered themselves pretty robust and well-informed consumers. I spoke with one over the weekend. He rang me up, a former very senior civil servant, to complain about just one of these, about how he realised he was being ripped off on his insurance renewal. He is a pretty alert guy. He graduated and took all the economics prizes at his university and pays great attention to these things and was able to spot it, but it wasn't easy for him. The fourth thing I think we can agree on is that the economic harms that digital markets bring require a great deal of public explanation. The political community in particular is far more concerned by the risk to their respective exchequers, to getting the money in, and to the erosion of the tax base that might come with digital, by online harms, by fake news, and by breaches, after all, they want to be re-elected, and by breaches of privacy and cyber risk, than they are by the market consequences of digital platforms. And in that hierarchy of concerns, politicians are rightly reflecting the views of ordinary consumers too, the people they represent. Most people don't pay much attention to the price they're paying in personal data for the services provided by Facebook and Google. And that too is part of the problem. Competition requires well-informed consumers with the time and energy to understand what they're paying and whether it is in money or personal data. So I've cited several major areas of agreement that digital has brought huge welfare gains, that it's also created massive economic and social detriment, and that many market-related harms command relatively little political attention compared to other harms being created by digital markets. Let me turn now to the more contentious questions that I started with. Do competition authorities need new powers? And can the existing toolkit that we have, certainly here in the UK, be better deployed than it is now? On the first of these, it seems clear to me that the pace of change in digital markets poses unprecedented challenges for the rules and laws that competition authorities have inherited from an analogue age. Perhaps this should have been evident a long time ago, but it's now becoming much more widely appreciated, and it's triggering a great deal of argument. In the EU, Margaret Vestager has suggested changing the burden of proof in competition cases, and she's made clear that responding to digital technology is a top priority for the new Commission. And there are a large number of international authorities, including Japan, Sweden, Australia and the Netherlands, who have initiated studies of digital markets. Some, including Belgium, Italy and Australia, have highlighted the limitations of existing competition law and the need for ex-ante regulation. In Germany, a new law, and we're very pleased to have Andreas Mundt with us, the head of the Bundeskartellamt. In Germany, a new law has been proposed giving the competition authority new powers and tools to deal with digital platforms. In the US, Elizabeth Warren and President Trump are both critical of digital platforms. They both criticize fake news, and they both want more tax revenues, as I alluded to a moment ago, but they completely disagree on how to deal with it. That, I think, how to deal with digital platforms could well become a major point of difference between the candidates for the presidency over the second half of the year. In my view, competition authorities best placed to weather the years ahead will be those, and the difficulties posed by digital, will be those that have thought clearly about whether they have the right tools and have said what those tools now need to be. And they're also the ones that can demonstrate that they are deploying the tools they already have as effectively as possible. On this point, a key question for the CMA, and probably for a number of other authorities, is how hard-edged enforcement tools can and should be buttressed by the greater use of soft power. By that, I mean engagement with private sector counterparties and other public authorities to discourage some activity and encourage others, to secure well-functioning markets. Not just alongside enforcement, but in some cases as a way of preventing enforcement action from becoming necessary in the first place. Soft power and hard power are not mutually exclusive. They, on the contrary, they can reinforce one another. Hard-edged enforcement against a cartel has a softer side effect. It deters others and persuades them to change their behaviour. Equally, if people know who we are, the CMA, they're more likely to report a cartel and help us enforce against it. And speaking up as an authority can boost the deterrent effect of enforcement, since the public opprobrium and reputational damage that comes from breaking the law would be greater. It seems to me that without deterrence, a lot of enforcement is scarcely worthwhile in the first place. So soft power improves the effectiveness of enforcement, but as I've tried to allude to there, it does much more than that. It helps competition authorities reach beyond enforcement. One further final point about soft power, it can certainly be strengthened and enhanced by greater international cooperation. In my view, working closely together globally has to be part of the future response of competition authorities to digital. We've got to all work much harder at this, however difficult it is, as a consequence of the variations in our legal base. I think it's important too for competition authorities to grasp that the stakes will be high if we don't get that right. Of course, we want support from government. The rise of protectionism and populism, though, might point in the opposite direction, so it will be a massive challenge for them. But if we don't get this right, if we fail, we could end up with a patchwork of rules and approaches to dealing with digital that will only further entrench the dominance of the biggest players, who are best equipped to deal with the complexity and best placed to exploit opportunities for regulatory arbitrage. If we fail, we could be destined, as Bill Kovacic, the former chairman of the FTC, recently put it at an event we held last week, and I quote, "to pedal earnestly on bicycles in futile pursuit of industries that move with the speed of racing cars." Elsewhere, I've set out in detail, in fact a year ago, both what powers the CMA needs to do its job, that's what I did a year ago, and also how it can use its existing powers better. Andrea and I led an event only last week on that, and I won't rehearse all the points that I made there again now. I'm keen to hear from others on the panel rather than repeat what I've just said. But I want to end with just one further point for fellow competition authorities. Harnessing a general point, harnessing the benefits and minimizing the harms of digital will require major adjustments on our part. Competition authorities are going to have to become very different institutions in the next quarter of a century than they have been in the last quarter of a century, the era of relative calm and moderation, the period, as it was called, of great moderation in the conduct of macro policy, which gave a microeconomic counterpart of rather similar structures of competition authority across many jurisdictions, and led to the rise, the rapid rise, in the growth of in the number of countries with robust competition laws. I think Bill Kovacic last week said that that had risen from something like 30 to 190 in the space of 2 or 3 decades. I think legislation on online harm, privacy and tax is either coming or it's already here in very many jurisdictions. And I think regulation is almost certainly coming in many jurisdictions too. So all this change is happening anyway. The question is how we respond to it, whether we try and lead it, whether we try and offer a measure of leadership by offering ideas and thinking constructively about it, or whether we wait to be told which approach to take. Of course, speaking up is always bumpy, but it's something I think all competition authorities are going to have to consider very carefully. In any case, this isn't some technical, analytical puzzle with a perfect solution. The shape of these markets is changing so fast that it'll inevitably need to provoke rapid adjustments to the policy response. But if I was forced to sum up what the contribution of the CMA can be, it is to deploy, as I was alluding to a moment ago, our in-house skills to say exactly what we really do think is required, to explain why firmly and boldly, and to do so as part of a continuous discourse with like-minded bodies in other jurisdictions and with the markets themselves. Today is just a small part of that effort. And I think it's time we got that underway. And with that in mind, I'd like to hand over to Martin Coleman. I hope Martin is around, who will chair the first panel, looking at how the disruption is affecting the way businesses structure themselves in response to digital. Thank you very much.